In this episode, we're talking to a grassroots environmental movement that has won the hearts of many in New South Wales, being successful in engaging the media and politicians in a meaningful way and galvanising an entire community. Manyana Matters Environmental Association have been fighting residential development in their patch of New South Wales because it's one of the only unburnt areas of bushland around the Conjola National Park on the New South Wales south coast.
Hi and welcome. Buckle up for a new episode of Beyond the Green Line, the only podcast hooking you up for a virtual coffee date with some of the leading changemakers, industry experts and everyday activists in environmental and agricultural sciences. So pop in your headphones, go for a walk and get ready for inspiration, ideas, insights and real-life stories beyond the green line we balance along.
Hello and welcome to this podcast of Beyond the Green Line. I'm your host, Chanel Gleeson-Willie. Our guest today is Jorj of Manyana Matters, a community action group opposing two residential developments of pristine bushland around the idyllic south coast village of Manana. This bushland is some of the only unburnt bush in the area and is refuge for displaced wildlife. The ones that have been recorded are the greater glider, ground parrot, powerful owls and square-tailed kites. Hi, Jorj, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell me what you remember of Manyana and from when you first moved there and why you actually decided to move there originally? Why was it so special?
Oh, it's a magic place, and I guess because it was quite remote and undeveloped, it was sort of perhaps even a bit of a secret, a well-kept secret, I suppose. Minimal development and kind of a unique situation where you've got 5 tiny little hamlets which form the Redhead Villages, and they're called that because they're on the Redhead Peninsula. So you've got North Bendalong, Manyana, Conjola Point and Beringer Lake. And, so they're all separated by a green corridor, and you've got to jump on your push bike or walk from one to the other. And around all of them there are quite empty beaches, and then around those townships of the Redhead Villages is a massive national park, the Conjola National Park. So you're very close to the ocean and the environment. You've got wildlife coming into your yard, beautiful bird life. And I'm a keen birder myself, so I was thrilled when I first moved there to see birds that you don't normally encounter in your day-to-day business as an Australian. So, I just immediately just fell in love. I felt really at home with nature there.
So this is, I guess, such a strong visual of what Manyana is and how wonderful a place it is. Can you tell me about the feelings that you were first experienced when you went there and what actually drew you to move there?
Yeah, well, I had been living in the Illawarra just up from Manyana, and I had a change in my whole life and ended up travelling around Australia in a motorhome by myself, and I took 18 months. As I was travelling, I was thinking, I was keeping an eye out for where I might like to move to one day. It wasn't even supposed to be then; it was one day in the future, But yes, I had some money that I needed to put back into real estate and make sure that I kept a roof over my head for when I needed it, and you wouldn't believe I went right past the turn-off to Manyana as I left the Illawarra. I went the whole way around Australia 18 months later, and then I've still got this money in the bank going, I really need to get back into the real estate market. And I was being pushed out from Wollongong. Everything was far too expensive for me. And it was just so bizarre. I literally, looking at real estate and thought, oh, wow, well, that's somewhere I could afford, the Conjola area. So these sort of out of the way places. And as I was self-employed, I could work from anywhere. It didn't worry me. In fact, I quite like being away from it all. So, yeah, I just found myself there at Bendalong Boat Ramp one night in my motorhome, and I just absolutely fell in love with the place straight away. So I went to the real estate agent and said, have you got anything for this much money? And I was taken to a couple of, let's say, renovators' delights, and and just got in. So I probably got about the last cheap, doer-upper there was available.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And I guess you're right. Yeah, the housing prices of Manyana have really risen as with everywhere else around Sydney. But Manyana really does have it all, doesn't it? It's got the beach, the bush, a great community, a lake, and you are away from it also for people who enjoy being away and having that seclusion and the quiet. That is just perfect.
Yeah, well, if you love the great outdoors, then it's perfect for you. But if you want shopping, healthcare, work, schools, churches, then it's not very good for you, because half an hour drive is what you need to do every day just to even get the basics, really. It's ideal for people who, are
more intrepid.
At that stage in their life. And I mean, of course, I guess now so many more people have realised that they can work from home. So it's opened that up a bit. But when I moved there, of course, before I bought this house, I did my due diligence and I went to the local council and I said, so is there any kind of development planned for the area, anything I should know about? And they said, you might want to know about these 3 parcels of land that have been slated for housing developments for quite a long time. Now, nothing's happened with them. It's been like 20 years, but they are zoned residential. They've been earmarked for residential. And so I was quite alarmed that not long after I moved in, one of these developments actually went ahead, and there seemed to be like no community consultation. It just kind of happened. Like, it was this awesome patch of coastal scrubland, and it was the cut through from Conjola Point to Manyana, and the fences went up and the machines came in and they just obliterated everything. It was disturbing. It was distressing. I mean, people were getting, diamond pythons in their backyard and antechinus going through their houses, and kangaroos, not knowing where they should go, and the sound of machines tearing down trees and mulching them up, So I very quickly mobilised, really. I mean, I was absolutely the new kid on the block, but I joined the local residents association. They're called a community consultative body, the CCB, and I joined the committee straight away and got active. And it ended up with a couple of my neighbours on each side, and us having cups of tea and talking about this, and how the locals were just like, oh, yeah, it'll never happen with these other 2 developments. And then, these for sale signs went up for both of these places. And there were no Facebook groups or anything happening in this town. And so we decided we need to start a Facebook group, find out about these proposed developments and get the community engaged and get them interested. And instead of expecting everyone to go to these, council websites or state government websites and try to make sense of all of these documents, let's break it down, make it simple, work together. Instead of just expecting individuals to do it off their own bat. I mean, I think these things are purposefully made complex to put people off getting involved. So that's how Manyana Matters started. It started as a Facebook page, and then when the fires came along, that's when it changed into something altogether, else.
Different. Yeah. I guess that very first residential development really did herald a change coming for Manyana. Do you have any sense of what was going on in the wider economy or, the state as to why this very dormant idea of large residential development around the Manyana area had all of a sudden risen up to be a change that was happening?
Well, it's interesting because back then, so we're talking about 2017, there were so many, there was always something available on the real estate market for sale in Manyana. And, just because they were beyond what I could afford, there were certainly affordable houses there. And there were lots of blocks of land that had never been developed. And so when this first one went up, it was a 40-block development, and it was a local developer, and they'd been sitting on it for a while. So these areas had been slated by a government a long time ago, and really they were being land banked for when there was a better time. But I must say that when that one went ahead, the locals were just like, why? There's so much available. Why would you do that now? But they did, and the blocks did sit there vacant and empty, and a lot were for sale, a lot were reduced in price until the coronavirus sort of changed everything.
Yep, and that, changed a lot of things in the world. So then you set up the Manyana Matters group initially as the Facebook page, as you said. Yeah. And what is Manyana Matters to you? So why is it opposed to this type of development in particular?
Yeah, well, look, I guess those three developments as a whole, Manyana Matters didn't start out like, we're opposed to development or anything like that. It was really to inform the community and make sure that the community was aware of what was going on, and to engage them, to make sure that they took the opportunity to respond to, various development applications or planning proposals. So just to make sure that, nothing was being missed there. But from a personal point of view, I love animals. They're so important to me, and I appreciate the importance of biodiversity for humans to survive as well. So it started out like that, but when the fires happened, the fires swept past Manyana, nearly right through it twice. So once on New Year's Eve and once the weekend after. And our local fireys, kept a check on things and were able to stop that first fire, which unfortunately we saw loss of life just across the water at Conjola with that fire. And the local fireys were able to prevent the embers from encroaching in the actual residential area. So it literally ran up the flank of Manyana. And then the following weekend, it came back absolutely with a vengeance, and it hit North Bendalong and then through Bendalong and then right through to Manyana. It was burning the back fences of the houses at Manyana. And honestly, there's nowhere to go. People were trapped in there, including tourists, and people were diving into the ocean and swimming out as far as they could. The aerial assistance were turned away because there was just too much smoke over town. It was unsafe for them. And right at the death knell, a southerly came in and blew the fire back on itself, and the town was saved. It could have been such a different story. After all of that aftermath, and after we were actually disconnected from the rest of the world for about 6 days because the power lines had fallen down over the one road in and out.
And there was no mobile phone coverage.
Exactly. We had no mobile phone coverage. We were actually getting the locals. It's exactly what's just happened with the floods up in Lismore. The locals mobilised and they helped each other out. There were people on boats and jet skis and doing the boat journey over to Ulladulla and bringing in medical supplies for people who needed their medication and so forth. Anyway, the township absolutely rallied and everyone, got through. But in the aftermath, we realised that, one, this first housing development, which they were already selling blocks for, and in actual fact, they'd even pegged it out for clearing, that it was due to happen, like right then. And it didn't burn. So the whole of the Conjola National Park surrounding us had burnt. And when you realise the severity of the fires, you knew that no animals survived. Nothing survived that. It burnt and it burnt again, Bendalong Mountain, they reckon it just kept, like the wind kept changing and it just kept burning. And we did lose a number of houses in that area. So
can you paint me a picture of what the bush that was not burnt is like and what that looks like?
Yeah, well, so you've got these two developments. So the first one we'll talk about is that 20-hectare lot, and we like to refer to that now as the Manyana Special Conservation Reserve. That's our end game. It's old, mature trees, hollow bearing. We know that there's raptor nests in there. One of our local fires, he's actually our president of our Manyana Matters Environmental Association, Bill. He fought the fires himself, and his in-laws are wildlife rescuers and rehabilitators, and he had released a greater glider in that land in the past. So, yeah, you're talking about old growth or mature, let's say mature forest, even some remnants of literal rainforest. So a few special ecological communities, some that are endangered. So, yeah, it's a place actually you don't really want to go. You don't want to try to wade your way through it because you'll end up with ticks. You'd be looking at dense scrub in some areas, but it does have quite a nice asset protection zone around it, so you can walk the periphery of the land. And I've certainly photographed square-tailed kites in there and seen goshawks and so forth. So that's the one that they wanted to put 180 houses on. Then the other one, it's quite cruel. It's a 76-hectare lot. On one side, it adjoins the Inyarda Beach, and on the other side, it adjoins the Inyarda Drive, which is the main road through to the Manyana hamlet. And cruelly, half of this land was always designated as environmental conservation. Now that half was absolutely decimated in the fires. Like it was just black sticks, and the ground was still smouldering days later. And then the half that didn't burn is the half they want to tear down to put about 300 houses on. So, and at one stage it was 300. Now they're talking about 100 large lots, but of course you can subdivide. We'll end up with 300 houses if it goes ahead. That land is a critically endangered ecological community. Basically, the whole of that land is, and we're talking about it's called an SAII, or what is it? A significant and irreversible impact entity. So if they did obliterate that ecological community there, it means we would basically have none left. So it's that special. The area, that land too, it's a floodplain. So developers speak about building levee banks and putting houses up behind retaining walls and so forth. And when are we going to realise that these are not areas that you build on? They're not areas you put houses on. And we need these areas for the special fauna that live there and can only live in those areas as well.
Yeah. And the bushland is still recovering years later. And before the fires came through, that all of those parcels of land, including a lot more, were refuge for species such as the greater glider and the swift parrot. Can you talk me through how the fires changed the fight for these blocks?
Yeah, because, I guess before we had this massive, it's like 11,000 hectare Conjola National Park that these animals could go to. But we very quickly realised that now these little passes, this refugia, they call them, anything that survived, if it made its way there, then that's the only place it had to go. For a long time, there was no shelter in the areas that had been burnt. So, some people might imagine that, oh, yes, I can hide here for a bit and now I'll go back to where I came from. But there was no shelter, no food, and a dangerous place to be as well. So the locals were actually supporting the wildlife for quite a while by providing feed. Unfortunately, there were horrific stories of, fireys being out in the firegrounds and just seeing birds literally drop from the sky, having to extinguish flames on greater gliders and so forth. And so many animals ended up dying a very cruel death. Anything that, didn't get away completely unscathed, it wasn't good. So these parcels of land now also, you've got to appreciate that they're the seed banks to regenerate the national parks that lost so much. So it's a long-term investment. And unfortunately, once you've had fire go through with this severity, now you've got a landscape which is even more susceptible to fire. So it's been shown that mature forests will actually, they'll help you, help protect you from fire, and they can withstand fire. But that's why logged areas are so bad when it comes to fire, because you've got, fire fuel on the ground as well. So really important. I know it's tempting to look at this epidemic growth that you see shooting out and everything sort of starts to look so green after a year or so, but actually it takes a really long time. It takes years and years for these areas to now, get back to that point where they can withstand things like fire.
Mm. And you've recently found ghost mushrooms in Conjola Point. These are fascinating freaks of nature. Can you tell me a bit more about those?
Yeah, well, look, I haven't actually seen them myself, but we've got, within our group, we've got keen naturalists and photographers, and they were so excited and sent through these photos. And so we found out a little bit more about them, but they're definitely not edible. I know that much.
No.
And they're pretty cool. And, they're obviously, well appreciated, and people will travel a long way to come and see them. It was a very popular post that we put on Facebook.
Yeah, so the scientific name is Omphalotus nidiformis, and I believe, I haven't seen them in the wild either, but I do believe that they luminesce, which is quite amazing. Obviously not the only things in nature that luminesce, but these are definitely something that I would travel to have a look at.
Yeah, well, I sort of came to realise that there's not just, like I'm a birder. I will travel a long way to see a lifer, as they call them. And then there's storm chasers, and now I know that there's mushroom chasers as well.
Yeah. So the council approvals that have already gone through for these blocks of land, they're a bit unusual, aren't they? They have been talked about as zombie development approvals. Can you explain what is meant by the term zombie development approvals?
Yeah, look, in actual fact, the 20 hectare lot, that had an approved development application, so that had council approval. But the other one, it has state zone, it was like actually called a major 3A development back at the time when it was slated for a future development. So it's never had actually council approval. It's never had a development application go all the way through. It's gone through many owners over the time, and it's exactly the environmental constraints I was speaking about earlier, which have meant nothing's ever flown there. But what it is I guess a zombie DA is another way of saying just land banking. So people will buy these things, they'll sit on them, they'll hope that in the future it'll be a more acceptable proposition. It might be, not viable at this moment in time. And unfortunately, with the 20-hectare lot that did have the council approval, many years ago, when they got that approval, an earlier developer actually, they had to do very little to enact that DA, and that meant that the DA held forever. So, now we're looking at something that would never be approved in this day and age. And so you can see that it's not right. The system is not working there. When the fires went through, that was our first, it's like, okay, so clearly we can't remove this habitat. The fires changed everything, and it's far too important in providing this refuge. But legally, there was no mechanism to stop it. So the first thing we did was actually petition Parliament. And for such a small community, we had to do it with hand signatures, because that's all that the government would accept at the time. And we got something like 2,000 signatures, which was unbelievable, and in a very short space of time, because we had to act very quickly. Of course, then COVID happened and government shut down. They weren't having their sittings, and now these days we have parliamentary petitions that are online. So we've come a ways, but we still don't have a way of making sure that these zombie DAs aren't plaguing communities for years to come. So just because it was a good idea, somebody thought many years ago, now that we know very clearly the environmental importance of these lands, it's nobody's happy with them going ahead. So
yeah, and I guess things have changed so much in the intervening years, especially with cumulative impact assessments, and we know that that is a really important area to be looking at, especially in this situation where we do have these legacy issues that are still there. Now, can you tell me about how the Environmental Defenders Office became involved?
Thank God for the EDO. Literally, I emailed the EDO just with an absolute plea for help. I mean, one of the locals who owned a drone put it up and took some footage of the devastated landscape after the fires. We threw it to some music, Flame Trees, Sarah Blasco's version, and said, look, we managed to get 3,000 tourists out this time between the fire events, but could we do it again? Do we really want to bring in all of this other development since we're so lacking in infrastructure? And can we afford to lose this habitat, this refugia, when we've already lost so much? And I had sent that out, and with the help of now what was becoming quite a group of supporters, we'd sent it out to local politicians and the council and anyone we could think of. And I reached out to the Environmental Defenders Office and said, please, is there some way you can help us? We've at least got to know the extent of the damage of these fires before we allow any more destruction. They couldn't agree more, and they jumped straight on board, and they've been fantastic. And even though they saw that that particular battle through to the day of court, they're still very much with us and holding our hand until we reach our objective.
So what studies were done during this process to inform the court case?
Yeah, because, of course, being a zombie DA, they were able to rely on environmental impact assessments from years ago, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just ridiculous because a lot changes in a short space of time. And, of course, when you have an event such as the catastrophic Black Summer bushfires, well, you know, it's undeniable what changes. So they had to go and redo and update these environmental assessments. There was also a specific study about the greater glider and whether it was likely to still occur on the land. Unfortunately, the fires, you know, birds will drop out of the sky even before flames reach them just from the smoke inhalation. And it seems that gliders are quite susceptible as well. So, you know, over a few days they did some surveys. It's not to say that they don't exist there, and certainly some might have moved in since. So it's a moment in time. But what they did find was that the grey-headed flying fox was quite reliant on that land because they'd lost so much of their home bases as well. So, yeah, there were quite a few species that were on the threatened species list that were recorded. After the fires, the government did come up with a provisional list of species that, you know, needed to be looked into as well because of that event, that fire event. So that added more to the list.
And where are things at now? So you mentioned that it, you know, went to court, but you're still in connection with the EDO.
Yeah.
Where are we standing right now?
Yeah, so we the whole premise of the court case was that we said you have to use the precautionary principle. We know that special species have been recorded, threatened species have been recorded on site in the past. That's proven through the Atlas of Living Australia and so forth, you know, official records. So we said you have to have that due diligence and you have to use what they call the precautionary principle, which is one of assuming that they're going to be there unless you can prove otherwise, and that this would, if this went ahead, it would have a significant impact on threatened species. So what happened was that the Minister for Environment did determine what they call that this project was a controlled action. So that made the developer go away and do further studies and answer a lot of these questions that had been raised. So they have gone ahead and done a lot of that, and then it gives the community an opportunity to then respond to their findings. So that happened. The Department of Environment was inundated with responses, and now we're waiting for a final determination. The developer themselves still have a step to fulfill in that process before that determination, and they haven't done that as yet either. So, yeah, the other development is a step behind. So it's a bit of a waiting game. I mean, it's kind of sounding a bit like they're still doing what they do best, which is sitting on it. We would love for that land to be purchased by the state and to be created, formed into a special conservation reserve in memory of all of the lives that were lost in the Black Summer bushfires. So we're not just speaking about human lives, but all of the animals. I mean, it numbers in the millions, the animals that were lost. So yeah, we had quite good support from the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces and the Minister for Environment, that they had money in the coffers that could have gone into it. We just needed the perfect storm of the developer willing to sell at an appropriate price, the government coming in, and the local council supporting as well. But at the moment, we haven't quite arrived there.
Yeah. Is it looking, I guess, possible that might happen?
Well, we've got a saying, it's, it's not over till the fat wombat sings. And we're definitely in there for the long haul. Look, I guess I was a bit naive when I came into this because I just thought you can see what's right and what needs to happen. And so you just do it, and it'll be done. You make enough people aware and it'll happen. But I realise now that these things do take time. So it's you've got to be in there for the long game. And we are, yeah.
And everything we've spoken about is showing, I guess, the community spirit that there is in Manyana and the resilience of the people that live there for really a very small community. To make so much noise and to band together so well is quite amazing. So what sort of advice would you give to others on their first steps to go down this journey if they have a similar issue where they live?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think the main thing is if you have an issue with something, and I think this could really be anything. So you might be talking to your partner or your kids or your neighbour about something that doesn't sit right with you. Don't just talk to your neighbour or your partner. Don't just put a comment on Facebook. Actually do something. I think it's actually interesting how powerful your one voice is, even if it's writing a letter to your local council, turning up to your residents' meeting, just getting involved. There are things you can do. And the thing that Manyana Matters taught us is that, okay, it was me and a couple of neighbours who thought, let's start this Facebook group. But when we needed help came from everywhere. And no one person could hope to do as much as Manyana Matters has done. But when you all add your skills and your experience and your ideas and your support, it's amazing what you can achieve together. So we sort of used to say we started a ripple, and now that ripple has become a wave, and we are aiming for a tsunami. We want the tsunami of change. And it's awesome to know that we have inspired other communities to start banding together and start talking about what's happening in their backyard and how they can make a difference. It was really, I think, really lucky that Manyana Matters Facebook page happened to be there because it gave a conduit where people could start the conversation. Our very first protest was yoga on the side of the road the day that they were supposed to be coming in and erecting the fences and bringing in machinery to fell this forest. And it was right at the time when they announced the COVID restrictions. So if you can cast your mind back a few years ago, you were allowed to go outside, but only to exercise. And you had to be socially distanced. So a few of us just rocked up at 6 a.m. and started doing yoga on the roadside. And then we put a call out on Facebook and said, the Manyana Special Conservation Reserve, as we call it. So I think that's a really great place to take your dog for a walk today, or push bike ride with the kids, And it was hilarious. We just ended up with 100, word got out. We had people coming in from Milton, Ulladulla and so forth, down from Nowra. And everyone was just out there like a surfboard under the arm or tennis rackets. Someone rocked up with scuba gear on their backs. Do you know what I mean? It was really quite hilarious. And even when the police showed up, all they could do was really smile. So where there's a will, there's a way, that taught us. But, yeah, I think just start and keep a track of everyone. like their names and their contact details and what they do for work or what their experience is or what's their level of ability to contribute. And before you know it, you've got kind of this stakeholder list of all of these different people you can call on. In our case, I say we were really lucky because people had gone through a life-threatening emergency, and it was a way that we could actually really support each other through a very dark time in our lives as well. And this land now resembles or symbolises, I guess, hope for this community. I think it would destroy a lot more than the forest and homes for animals if it was allowed to be lost.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jorj. It's been really lovely talking to you. How can we help Manyana Matters Environmental Association to keep fighting that good fight? What can we do?
Well, we'd love you to jump onto our Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/Manyana Matters. We're also on Instagram and Twitter if they're more your thing. We do have an association of which you can become a member if you'd like to get really involved. And yeah, so just keep an eye on that. We put calls out every now and then for people to rally and respond to development. You know, we had to recently, this new development application for the larger parcel of land. So the council saw, I think it was over 300 submissions, unique individual submissions opposing that development. So yeah, like we're happy for houses to go up in appropriate areas. Absolutely, there's a need for that, but not when it's one of the last refuges for animals that have escaped the flames, and particularly not when it's critically endangered ecological communities and a floodplain as well. So,
definitely.
Yeah, I think we might have broken a record there of responses. So, yeah, any support's appreciated. And, just go and do your own thing as well. Mobilise, because you can't do everything, you know. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You know, you've got to just start to gather people around you, and then you'll be ready for when it happens in your backyard. And yeah, I need to stress that we're not just talking about housing development here, because that just happens to be what the situation is where we are. But it could be anything.
Could be anything, yeah, definitely. Well, that wraps up this episode of Beyond the Green Line podcast. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Green Line, brought to you by Moss Environmental. Subscribe to our podcast for your weekly invitation to join the conversation. Until next time, keep thinking green.